Ebola virus disease is a severe disease that causes hemorrhagic fever in humans and animals. Viral hemorrhagic fevers are characterized by three main symptoms and signs, which are fever, flu-like symptoms, hemorrhage of the mouth, nose, lungs, digestive tract hematemesis, and bloody diarrhea. Ebola is not an airborne disease like influenza or TB. The Ebola virus can spread through contact with infected animals, contact with blood, body fluids, or tissues of infected persons, and contact with medical equipment, such as needles contaminated with infected body fluids. Exposure can occur in healthcare settings when staff do not wear appropriate protective equipment, such as masks, gowns, and gloves. As long as precautions are taken, there is a low risk of contracting Ebola virus disease in a country where the disease is present. The first Ebola virus disease outbreaks occurred in remote villages in Central Africa, near tropical rainforests, but the most recent outbreak in West Africa has involved major urban as well as rural areas. Community engagement is key to successfully controlling outbreaks. Good outbreak control relies on applying a package of interventions, namely case management, surveillance and contact tracing, a good laboratory service, safe burials, and social mobilization. Early supportive care with rehydration and symptomatic treatment improves survival. There is as yet no licensed treatment proven to neutralize the virus, but a range of blood, immunological, and drug therapies are under development.
Yeah, good morning and welcome to Bonitas House Call here on SABC2. Mafrika Romat, Krokotso Hayatin. I'm Dr. Victor Ramathesele. Tinanulu Sitang Nakakatlu. Little when I have Saturday session, which is well Mashumara for Lesso or Abrobedu. Now, 4,000 deaths and still counting, as the insert showed. The Ebola virus disease, although it was first described way back in 1976, it has caused sporadic outbreaks in the mother continent over these years. But it is the current epidemic in West Africa that has brought the world's attention to this devastating disease. Now, thankfully, due to our long distance from the epicenter and our efficient and also stringent healthcare systems and policies, South Africa is still spared the effects of the EVD, or at least not just yet. Now, don't forget to join our discussion by calling us on 011-326-4740 with your questions and comments on the Ebola virus disease, or you can send your SMSs to Bonitas 33723. Kuyacaca mntu ukuthi lesifo lesi simphica abadala ngempela futhi simbulalazwe esidla fumuka sidle silaza. Uxoxa-ke kabanzi ngale ndaba ke we have invited into the studio Professor Shabir Madi, who is Executive Director of the National Institute for Communicable Diseases here in South Africa, as well as Dr. Fru Benson, Chief Director of Communicable Diseases in the National Department of Health. Colleagues, yeah, thank you very much for joining us this morning. The insight has already showed. The United Nations has spoken, the World Health Organization has spoken, the African Union has spoken, and the South African National Department of Health has also spoken. This is a very, very serious condition. But first, Professor Madi, let's just clear a few things here. You know, what happened this past week is that Morocco, who's supposed to host the Africa Cup of Nations of 2015, have come out to say they are now a little bit jittery about hosting this tournament because of Ebola. Now, I can't believe this. It just shows to what extent people don't understand the disease. Do you want to clarify exactly what Ebola is and how it spreads?
So, Victor, I think you're spot on. So I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of preconceived notions and public misconceptions in terms of what Ebola is, how easy it is to spread, and how people actually acquire it. And that's a key to the foundation to our problem right now in terms of communication. So I think it needs to be explicit that someone is not going to get Ebola unless that person is in direct contact with someone that has got Ebola, and not just shaking the person's hand or sitting next to the person, but actually direct contact with the body of the person, with the bodily secretions of the person, with blood from the person, with organs from the person, or with the vomitus of the person. So you really need to be in close contact with the individual person that's actually infected and that's clinically symptomatic from the disease to actually contract Ebola. Ebola is not a disease that's actually spread by way of airborne spread. It doesn't happen in that way. Unlike influenza virus or tuberculosis for that matter, which are airborne spread and much more infectious, Ebola is not that infectious. It's contagious insofar as if you come into direct contact with it, you could become infected, but it's not highly infectious in that it doesn't just spread very widely and freely through the airborne transmission. And that's really the basis in terms of why we believe that even if there were to be an imported case in South Africa, the chances of any sort of a meaningful public outbreak is going to be minimal. And I think what supports that is experience in Senegal and experience in Nigeria, 2 countries which actually had imported cases of Ebola. Now, those 2 countries have got healthcare systems which function, but they're not of the quality that you find in the United States, as an example. So what have we seen in Senegal and what have we seen in Nigeria? In both of those countries, we had imported cases of Ebola into those countries. People coming from one of those affected, from one of the other affected countries, traveling to those countries and actually presenting with Ebola.
Are you saying in other words, Prof? Are you saying in other words, Prof, and without confusing anybody, Ebola virus disease is very difficult to transmit from one person to
It's
another?
very difficult to transmit unless you're in physical contact with a person that's actually sick from the virus.
Okay, hold on there. Dr. Fru Benson, as South Africans, are we safe from Ebola?
What South Africans need to know is that we in 1996 had a case that came from Gabon, a medical doctor, that came to South Africa, did not declare that he was involved and were in contact with sick people in Gabon, was admitted to a hospital, and in fact, when the nurse became ill, the nurse that treated him, we then found out that this person had Ebola. So we managed to then contain this outbreak. It did not spread to the community. We effectively contained the outbreak.
Although, unfortunately, we lost the nurse.
Unfortunately, the nurse died.
But the disease did not spread throughout South Africa.
The disease did not spread in the community.
Correct.
We also had an outbreak, Lujo virus. This is in 2008, where a case from Zambia came. This case was totally unknown. We did not know what the person suffered from. In fact, it was thought that this case suffered from tick bite fever. This person was transmitted with an ambulance. The ambulance attendants that came into contact with the body fluids became ill. Unfortunately, a cleaner, this person was admitted to a private hospital. A cleaner became ill, and a nurse became ill. But what I want to demonstrate there, the people that were at risk, this was a rhinovirus called the Lujo virus.
Which was one of the hemorrhagic virus,
Which
the
is a
family from
hemorrhagic
which
fever.
Ebola came. Okay.
It's not the same family. It's a different type of virus. Maybe just to explain quickly, you have different type of viral hemorrhagic fevers. You have the type that's transmitted by mosquitoes and arthropods. Those are, for instance, yellow fever and other dengue, and what we get in South Africa, Congo fever. Then you have viruses transmitted by rodents, and this type, Lujo virus, is transmitted by rodents. Yeah. And you also have Lassa fever as an example. The Ebola is transmitted by bats. And obviously in this, you also have Marburg virus. They are the viruses that causes the highest mortality.
Just hold it there. Now let us hear a little bit more about what the ambassador from Guinea in South Africa had to say about this matter.
As per our support from the rest of what is concerned, I can say that Guinea has received a great deal of support from the World Health Organization, the Doctors Without Frontiers, CDC of Atlanta, and many governments all over the world. South Africa has pledged today, and the Honorable Minister will elaborate on that later, a lot of material, equipment for hospital, and so on. So, what we need, because people are still dying in Guinea and in Liberia and Sierra Leone, what we need is a massive and fast support from all over the world. fast people will die. That's the main issue. Thank you very much.
Professor Mari, you can hear the plea from a representative of Guinea that you need fast and massive support. Now, if we look at West Africa and the manner in which it has been affected, why is the West Africa or these three countries, Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, battling so much in containing this epidemic?
So I think that's an important question, and it also what discriminates South Africa in terms of the potential of an epidemic taking hold in South Africa. I think the countries that we're talking about are countries which unfortunately, to a great extent, even before the Ebola outbreak, didn't have functional healthcare systems. When I'm talking of a functional healthcare system, I'm talking of more than just a primary healthcare clinic or a hospital. I'm talking of an integrated functional healthcare system which allows adequate level of surveillance, early detection, adequate control measures at a level of the healthcare facilities, etc. So there's a whole component in terms of what constitutes a functional healthcare system. It's not just a primary healthcare clinic or a hospital. There's an epidemiological aspect of it, there's the surveillance aspect of it, and all of that brought together brings about a functional healthcare system. What happened in those three countries, unfortunately, is that the seriousness of the epidemic was realized just way too late. It was only realized around about March, when in fact the first case probably started off way back in December.
So they were slow to react.
They were slow to react to the initial few cases that started, and it was really Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, that actually raised the flag in March. But even then, it took a long time for the international community to mobilize, to start providing the type of support which was already required in those countries at that early stage of the epidemic in terms of controlling it. So what we saw is basically absence of truly functional healthcare facilities. We saw a delay in terms of the reaction to the cases which started, and that allowed for greater transmission within the communities. And now what we face with basically is a widespread epidemic in those countries, which becomes multifold, more difficult to actually contain.
It just goes to show that those three countries, one thing they have in common, certainly, is that they've all been through civil war. And it just goes to show how civil war can affect their health policies and healthcare services to the extent to which they cannot deal with epidemics such as that. Before we just listen to the Liberian ambassador to South Africa, let's just look at this SMS. Now, is it possible, or can I get the disease from breathing in the same area with somebody who's got Ebola, Dr. Frubenson?
Well, what was stated by the Prof earlier, you need to be in contact with a person's body fluid. But even if you're in contact, your skin need to be non-intact. For instance, you need to have a scratch in your skin, or alternatively, you need to touch your mucous membranes. For instance, if you're in touch with a vomiters and practice good hygiene practices, go and wash yourself well with soap and water, wash your hands, and thereafter eat. You would not transmit the virus to yourself.
Clearly, this virus is very, very difficult to transmit. Now, let us the turn of the Liberia's ambassador to South Africa to give us a sense of when her country is dealing with this challenge. Let's have a look.
We have received a number of support. We have a lot of NGOs on the ground. The WHO is there. Médecins Sans Frontières is there. And all the other local NGOs are there, and they join us in this fight against Ebola. With respect to the countries of the world, countries from the EU have been very, very active in Liberia. And most importantly, the government of the United States of America have responded to the call of my government. And as I speak to you, there's a number of Americans on the ground from the military, and they are constructing a lot of hospitals, quarantine centers, to be able to help us in the fight against this deadly disease. Basically, other African countries have sent us donations in cash and in kind to help us to overcome this deadly disease. But not only to overcome the deadly disease, but also to make it a sustainable cure of the disease.
Oh, devastating indeed, and a very, very interesting plea that is made by the Liberians there. Now, if you look at any medical problem, Professor Madi, there will be healthcare-related factors that bring it about or that make it difficult to contain. And there'll also be community or patient-related factors. Now, you have clearly described how the healthcare systems in Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone have not been effective, have not been in a position to deal with the epidemic as it were. But what are some of the things that the people of those three countries are doing that maybe we South Africans are not accustomed to, that make it very difficult for this particular condition to
So I think
thrive?
that's a really important point in terms of us understanding why those countries and why not other countries. So Fru has mentioned that in this family where Ebola is, there's another virus, which is known as Marburg virus. Now, Marburg virus, in fact, the fatality rate from that virus, which is also viral, which also causes hemorrhagic fever, the fatality rate from Marburg virus is, in fact, is much higher than Ebola virus. It's
So
considered
people die from it
they die
in
from
greater
it.
numbers
Yes.
than Ebola virus.
And if someone becomes infected with Marburg virus, you're more likely to die than if you actually had Ebola virus.
By the way, not
Now-
everybody with Ebola dies.
Not everyone. Only right now about 1 in 2, and in fact that probably could be 1 in 10 if there's adequate healthcare facilities. But the reason I'm mentioning Marburg virus is that Marburg virus is much more widely geographically spread than Ebola virus. In fact, much of Africa, there's actually Marburg virus circulating, even in bad populations. But the reason why people in southern Africa don't die or don't contract Marburg virus is that there isn't this culture which actually exists in West Africa. And some of the cultural practices that exist, as an example, is the eating of bats. Now, bats are thought to be the prime... I know, but
okay.
look, the reality is that there's different cultures and there's different things in terms of what people eat. I mean, people eat dogs in Southeast Asia, something that we wouldn't think about. But the reality is that in West Africa, in some of these countries, people eat bats. And bats,
I'm told it makes mint soup.
so
These bats,
the bats
yeah.
are a natural reservoir. And unfortunately, these bats are a natural reservoir of Ebola. If you're going to eat a bat, you're going to become sick. In addition to which, the bats can actually transmit the virus to other wild animals, right? People hunt down these wild animals, and then they contract Ebola from the wild animals, or they deal with the carcasses of dead animals, which are infected with Ebola, and that's how they actually contract.
Because of coming to body fluids of
Correct.
those carcasses.
So basically what's happening is that we're getting a skipping of the virus from its natural host, which is not human, to human. But once humans become infected, that's when they start spreading the virus among themselves, when you come into direct contact with each other. Now the reason, and that's really part of the reason why what we're seeing is happening in those countries is happening. But another important aspect in terms of the culture that's contributing to this in a place such as Sierra Leone is that it's estimated that 50% of the cases in Sierra Leone relates to the handling of people that have actually, handling of the bodies of people that have actually died from Ebola.
Some of the
So
rituals
there's a whole lot of
dictate
burial
that they have to come
practices.
into contact
Exactly.
much more.
There's a whole
with
lot
the
of
dead
burial
bodies.
practices which require you to cleanse the body, to remove the clothes, to clean, put on new clothes, and that results in physical contact with someone who's highly contagious. Right? Someone that's got Ebola virus circulating through the entire body. The person has died, the secretions that are coming out, people are handling those secretions. And that's contributing to up to 50%
And how long will the
of
disease
cases.
last in a dead body? How long, if once a person has died with the virus, still be coming out to infect other people who are handling that dead
Right.
body?
I'm not too sure we know that because we don't allow those bodies to lie around for a long time.
You're
We
cremating
obviously-
most of them
we
now.
wa- Well, we're
Let's
wanting
hold
to
it there.
create.
Let's
most
hold
of
it
them.
there. Manes, hey, wa utlwa tabeng e thata. Go ba matshwafo he, o be pelo sekotlolo. We'll continue our discussion on the Ebola virus disease. Hang hang a re kgutla papatsong. Ha re matheola. Mogaeso, ga wa latlhega, o gorogile ka tlhamana le mo thulaganyo ya gago ya mamoratwa e bong Bonitas House Call o SABC 2. Ga gorogela go golagana le rona ka tlhamana le mo nomorong ya 011 326 4740 kgotsa mafaratlhatlha SMS mo Bonitas 33723. The National Minister of Health, Honorable Dr. Ramathesele, is leading South Africa's response to the Ebola virus disease. Now let's hear what he has been up to this point.
We are sending a lot of assistance. Firstly, 7 weeks ago, we sent a team of experts with a mobile laboratory. They've conducted more than 2,000 tests in West Africa. In fact, the number of tests conducted by foreign governments in West Africa, South Africa has done the most. And the team has just been back, they've sent another team. So that's when we started, in other words, 7 weeks back. But now, presently, today here, we had called the corporate world, the private sector in South Africa. We have met with them. They've donated these ambulances you see here. They've donated scooters. They've donated medicines. We are looking for electric generators. South Africa has bought 16,000 personal protective clothing through the World Health Organization. We've paid for them. The World Health Organization will go there and deliver them on our behalf. So up to so far, that's the help we have done. We have trained 25 health workers per each SADC country as also our contribution. And our mobile, our National Institute of Communicable Disease Laboratory is also going to do tests not only for us but for the whole of SADC. There are about 8,000 people affected with about 3,800 deaths.
Yeah, you know, it's very commendable to see Dr. Fru Benson, what South Africa is doing, led by the minister. There was an engagement with SADC. Now the South Africans have sent a team to West Africa to go and deal with this. But so that we don't get confused, how do you identify somebody with Ebola?
Well, first of all, the problem that you've got is that the symptoms that a person develops is very non-specific. For instance, it's flu-like symptoms. The most common symptoms that a person have is fever. So, in terms of the case history, you need to get a history that that person has been in contact with somebody that's sick. So, flu-like symptoms with a person that either come from Sierra Leone and has a history that they've been in contact with somebody that's sick, that's the person that you'll test.
Okay.
Now, the only way to diagnose is to do a laboratory test.
I see.
And obviously, in South Africa, we've got the NICD that has a great
National
capacity.
Institute of Communicable Diseases,
Yes.
where Professor Madi comes from.
That's correct.
Okay.
And their capacity, they recognize as a center of excellence for the whole SADC region.
I see.
In fact, in SADC, well, in Africa, they've got the only BSL-4, Biosafety Level 4 laboratory, where
Here in
you
South
can
Africa.
deal with formidable viruses like Ebola virus.
Once diagnosed, what do? You even isolate them, you quarantine them, and take them away from society long before you even ascertain the diagnosis. Once you have the suspicion, you take them away, isolate them, do the blood test, and wait for the results, or what do you do?
Exactly. So once you've got a clinical suspicion, before you even do the blood test, once the person is clinically suspected of having Ebola, which could be difficult because of the non-specific symptoms, you need to isolate that person, number one. Number two, you need to confirm the diagnosis. As soon as you confirm the diagnosis, if the person is positive, you keep that person isolated. But what's more important than all of that, right, is to make sure that you follow up the direct contacts of that individual. Because if you don't follow up the direct contact of those individuals,
they could be spreading
they're
the
going to be
disease.
spreading the disease in the community.
Yeah.
And those direct contacts need to be under surveillance for up to 21 days. Because the incubation period of this virus usually is less than 10 days, but it can extend up to 21 days. So that is where the big challenge comes in West Africa in terms of controlling it. It's fine to treat the patient, right? But unless you're actually dealing with the number of other household contacts of that individual patient.
Because there's less organization there getting addresses and whatever.
Exactly.
Hey, and man, just believe and pay, believe and pay. Gloria, you're joining us from Mpumalanga. Thank you for joining Bonitas House Court. Good morning.
Morning.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, my worry is, what if this virus has mutated and become airborne?
Or you say by mutation, I mean if the virus, like so many of them, changes its shape, and what if it mutated and became airborne? That is something that would really worry us, Gloria. Would you agree? But let's see if the experts say that. Is it possible for this virus to change its shape and whatever and end up being airborne?
Look, in nature, nothing is impossible in nature, and nothing is completely predictable, right? But this virus has been with us since 1976. This virus has not mutated since 1976 to become an airborne.
It has become
spread.
the same virus.
It's the same virus that we're dealing. It mutates, but the transmission mode has remained the same.
Aren't we lucky that at least that is the case? Because if this virus had mutated, I mean, it would be very, very difficult.
Exactly, and the reason why we know this virus has not mutated to be airborne is that if this virus really had mutated to be airborne, the type of transmission that would be occurring in these communities is multifold greater than what is actually happening at the moment. I mean, we need to think back to 2009 when we had swine flu, which is an airborne virus. That started off in Mexico, and within a few months, it was global.
Correct.
Okay, so this is an airborne virus. If Ebola was an airborne virus,
Would
we'd
be
expect
serious.
exactly the same.
Would be serious.
Right, you wouldn't just have a clustering of cases in those 3 countries.
Yeah.
This would have 9 months down the line since this outbreak started, you would have expected this virus to be throughout the world and not just affecting cases that are imported into countries,
Yeah.
but affecting everyone in those communities.
Just by the way, mutation is when a virus changes its shape. You know, viruses are very, very smart, which is why, unlike bacteria, they are much more difficult to manage because once it's get confronted with the antibiotics and all these funny things that fight it, nature dictates that it must try to prevent death or its annihilation. It mutates and then it changes, and in that way it becomes very, very difficult. Now, there's more that South Africa and the WHO and the rest of the world are doing to support those countries in West Africa that are affected by the Ebola virus. Let's see.
Remember that a lot of human behavior has to change in this. It is true that a culture that we've been practicing for ages is not easy to change, but we were not here in the meeting. When the ambassador of Liberia was outlining a situation that will just make your tears flow, he said a 2-month-old baby was found sucking on a mother who has passed on because nobody was ready to collect that corpse. Everybody was running away. Immediately they realized this lady has passed on. They all disappeared, leaving a 2-month-old baby there to suckle on this mother who's already passed on. That's what the ambassador said here earlier on. Now, with that situation, you don't expect people to resist. They need help. Because, as they said, some of the corpses are lying all over the streets because the moment you fall down, people run away and disappear. Now, it will infect many more others. In the beginning, they've asked for a mobile mortuary. But we believe once there's a mobile mortuary, they'll still be in contact. So it's better that the bodies be cremated as they are found. And we think once they see the need for that, because it will help cut down the infection. So we really don't think there will be resistance.
Very, very interesting. I mean, the minister, and by the way, I mean, it's just interesting and very commendable to see all South Africans coming in to support West Africa and the rest of the world who are dealing with it. We saw Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela there is also, pledging her support. But talking about people that had left a dead body and the child, unknowing that the mother had already died, kept on sucking from the breast of the mother, obviously transmitting the virus to themselves. Now, what are these body fluids? Let's sort out this matter of these body fluids that are supposed to transmit the virus. What exactly are those body fluids?
Okay, so the body fluids we're talking about are vomiters. When someone vomits, they bring up vomiters.
And you happen to touch or to
And
come
you
to
touch the
direct contact
vomiters,
with
exactly.
that, you will
If
get
you,
Ebola.
if you have diarrhea, you have stools.
Yeah.
The stool contains the Ebola virus. Semen contains the Ebola virus.
So it can be sexually transmitted?
Exactly, it can be,
right.
right? And the virus can be in semen for up to about 7 weeks, okay? Blood is another type of bodily fluid.
A person who's infected with the Ebola virus, the virus is existing in their semen for 7 weeks.
Up to 7 weeks.
Even after that healed completely, if they're lucky enough to heal.
They could continue shedding the virus for a bit of
I
time.
can
So saliva itself, so salivary secretions, that itself contains
So
the
kissing,
virus.
especially if you've got mouth ulcers and where there's a...
Exactly, but I
yeah.
think the point is you need to be in direct contact with those bodily fluids,
Okay.
right? So you need to be really in direct personal contact with the person
Yes.
that's actually sick.
And of course, blood.
becomes
If you
sick.
come into contact
As
with
I
blood,
mentioned, blood
like
is
it so often happens with healthcare workers, that will be the case.
Exactly.
Now, Dr. Fruben said there's a Tabang here who's a football fan. He wants to add his piece to the contribution. Tabang is joining us from Eshowe. Thank you for joining Bonitas House Call. Good morning to you.
Hey, morning, Doc.
Hey, kunjani mfethu?
Ngiyaphila.
Danke mfethu man. Owarithi
Yeah,
ngeMorocco?
man. Yeah, the question that I'm having for you aspect there is that can they recommend SAFA? Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, man. The question that I'm having to your aspect there is that can they recommend SAFA to take the AFCON, to host the AFCON here in South Africa? Are we safe as South Africans from this virus? Because, hey, with the look of things, I'm very scared for SAFA if they can bring this AFCON to be hosted here in South Africa. Can they tell SAFA now that, okay, SAFA, you can take the AFCON, you can host this occasion. We are safe from being affected of Ebola.
Uyabona
Can they say that?
Uyabona Thabang mfethu ushendodeni ngoba nami nje into ekade ngifuna ukuyibuza lamadoda ngoba Kodwa sesikhathele ukuhosta madwa. Kanti naso dlala ngokuhosta nje kuphela singaqualify. Kodwa kulungile ngizathi bayiphendule lo mbuzo. Okay, you heard the question loud and clear, Dr. Frubenson. When we come back from the break, we are going to address ourselves to whether or not you would want to advise the South African Football Association to take over the tournament that Morocco are saying they are scared to host because of the Ebola virus disease. We'll continue our discussion on the Ebola virus disease when you return. Welcome back. You're watching Bonitas House Call here on SABC2. Sesotho Sere Budiba, Boloka Kalere. As we have heard from the Minister, South Africa has sent a team of medical experts to West Africa to go and render some material support. And we'll catch up with the leader of this team upon their return. Let's hear what they tell us.
The virus was imported to Sierra Leone from Guinea originally. And there's many reasons why it spread so widely and so quick. I think the same reasons are in Guinea and also in Liberia. First of all, that is the first Ebola outbreak in this part of the world, and also the health system there wasn't really prepared to control this outbreak. Plus, because that's the very, very first outbreak in West Africa, people don't have enough knowledge about the disease, and they don't have enough knowledge how to protect themselves, including how to protect themselves during taking care of a sick person at home, how to protect themselves while taking care of the patient even at the hospital level, and also, as we know, the burial practices highly contribute to the spreading of the Ebola virus. And because it's very, very sensitive, people are very emotional. Very often they just don't care. They want to hug, they want to kiss, and they will do that. But I think there is more and more understanding that whoever is infected, doesn't matter if that's your wife or your kid, you know, these precautions has to be taken. And the traditional way how we say goodbye must be rather avoided. And people has to be buried under special precautions.
The safest way indeed to bury these people who have been affected by the virus is cremation, and to avoid direct contact with the body after the person has died. But Wisdom wants to get more wisdom on Ebola virus, and he's joining us from Johannesburg. Wisdom, thank you for joining Bonitas House Call. Good morning to you.
Morning,
Wisdom.
how are you?
Yes, sir.
How are you, morning, sir?
Good yourself, Wisdom?
I'm very fine.
Your question, sir.
My question says, the doctor they're saying you can get the Ebola through direct contact. I don't understand how. Through direct contact, shaking hands, they're saying no. Flu, I understand they're saying no. So how?
How
exactly? How? They must clarify.
Okay.
Those countries like Sierra Leone, I do believe they share the borders, the people they travel, like Zimbabwe, South Africa, Botswana, that's how the people they get it. Because those countries, they go through border to border. You understand what I mean?
Okay, loud and clear. Yeah, Wisdom. I remember one of the members of the deceased KK11, the football team that came from Zambia. They had a star player they called Wisdom Chanza, so possibly named after him. But wisdom is wisdom. Now, direct contact. What exactly do we mean? Shaking hands, kissing, hugging, sexual relations? What is direct contact?
What we say direct contact is contact with the body fluids. So you either come in direct contact with the person's vomit, or you come in direct contact with the person's stools.
That is touching it with your naked hands.
With your naked hands, but as I said, if your skin is intact, the virus cannot go through intact skin. It needs to go through where your skin is broken. It will go through there. Alternatively, if you touch the body fluids and touch your membranes, your membranes, what we call mucous membranes, is in the mouth, in the eye, and if you touch yourself and inadvertently touch your mucous membrane. So for instance, you may have something in your eye and you would want to take it out after you've touched vomiters or blood or anything. That's the way you infect yourself.
Not shaking hands necessarily.
Well, there's been stories about the virus in sweat, but it's really when a person has a very progressive illness, that you can have the virus in sweat as well. In the concentration of the virus in different body fluids is not equal.
Is it highest in blood?
That's and at the moment, vomit. It's extremely high in the gastrointestinal fluid, but it's high in the blood as well. Because
semen and vaginal fluids.
It would be less than in the blood.
I see.
For instance, WHO have talked about sweat as well, but as I said, the concentration in sweat is extremely low. And where the disease is fulminant or progressive, the concentration would be high. So it's not transmitted through coming into contact with a person's skin. A person that has died, that person normally have secreted, that person would have vomited. So that person would have been soiled with a lot of body secretions. And that's the way it's transmitted.
A lot of it is gonna. Okay. Now, we still have to answer Tabang from Esho about the Cup of Nations, but let us hear more about what the good professor and what has transpired in West Africa and the progress they are making in combating the ever-elusive Ebola virus in that part of the world.
Since I represent the National Institute for Communicable Diseases and I am the head of the Center for Emerging and Dangerous Pathogens, we are specialized in viral diagnostics for dangerous pathogens, including the Ebola. And over the last couple of years, I developed a mobile capacity. That means that staff of my center are capable of being transported to any place where there's a problem with an outbreak of dangerous or unknown pathogens and set up safe diagnostic facility. So basically, we are trained for the mobile deployment and we try to set up the diagnostic capacity on the scene of the outbreak to suit the needs for the diagnosis of the patients where the outbreak is happening. What we try to achieve now, we first of all have to make sure that the investment which we made in Sierra Leone in setting up the mobile lab facility is sustainable. Okay, so this is my major kind of a duty for the future, to make sure that we've got enough people and we've got enough resources to rotate the teams so they can go there, provide the service for 4 weeks, come back, rest, and eventually go back. The budget has been proposed to the Ministry of Health and also has been proposed to the WHO. There is a need for the South African mobile lab in Sierra Leone in Freetown to actually upscale the diagnostic capacity. At the moment we can do 58 PCR reactions, but there is a need actually to at least double this capacity to 116. So obviously that means that we have to double the amount of the diagnostic reagents which we need. Bearing this in mind, the budget has been proposed, and for the next 6 months we're looking for about 4.5 million rand to keep this operation going there.
Yeah, protection of our healthcare workers. We'll do that just before we retire today. But can you go back to Tabang from Esho? Would you think the Moroccans are exhibiting lack of knowledge about how this disease operates, and maybe a certain measure of xenophobia when they say they don't want to host a tournament because they are afraid that all those people who will be coming from all over Africa will bring the virus into their country?
So I think I agree with you. It's probably an issue of lack of sufficient information, and they're probably being overcautious in terms of their action. So certainly there's no country in the world that wants to open its borders completely and risk an imported case of Ebola, particularly if those countries are not adequately equipped to actually deal with an imported case of Ebola. Now, I think the issue that we face right now in terms of CAF is an issue as to whether we should delay it and perhaps allow for the epidemic to die off, or do we still continue doing it now and right now as scheduled in February. If CAF decides to do it in February, I think it's not going to be business as usual. I think that's a given. Irrespective of whether it's in Morocco, South Africa, or any other country, it can't be business as usual in that there are travel restrictions for people that travel from those affected countries, and those travel restrictions will need to be respected. So there might well be a decision that for those 3 countries, that supporters from those countries might not really be allowed out of those countries. And that's unfortunate, but that's going to be one of the ways to mitigate the risk of an exported case of Ebola from those countries. So the soccer players might need to go through a period of observation up to 21 days to ensure that they're not actually infected. It's a very low likelihood, but these are the precautionary measures that will need to be undertaken to provide sufficient sort of peace of mind that the people that are actually coming out of those countries are not actually infected.
Your advice to SAFA?
My advice to SAFA is, I don't think economically, I don't think South Africa should be hosting this particular tournament. It's an economic
Leaving the
play.
Ebola virus alone. We have just hosted it. We have hosted
exactly.
the cocaine.
I think it costs the country
But from
money.
the point of view of the Ebola?
From a medical point of view, like I said, if South Africa decides to host it, it needs to be done in consultation with the government, obviously, right? But it won't be business as usual, in that we will have to impose travel restrictions for people that are traveling from those affected countries or that have been to those affected countries in the past 21 days.
And that decision cannot be made by SAFA alone. It has to be made in conjunction with government.
Yeah, maybe just to explain, the minister has also formed, after the SADC meeting of the 6th of August, they formed the Interministerial Committee on Ebola.
Okay.
Now, they have met just yesterday. And I think part of this issue is that well, the Minister of Sport is part of this interministerial committee. I'm certain that if a decision is made on hosting, SAFA needs to take it to the government. And therefore, the government would pronounce on such a matter.
And ensure that we have the resources, human and otherwise, to host this tournament
But
successfully.
as been said, there's a lot of other factors that need to be considered. We've, accommodated when Liberia could not accommodate the African Cup of Nations. We've accommodated
Libya,
that.
that was,
We
yes.
had Chan,
Yes.
or it was Libya.
Yeah.
We had also Chan, and over a very short space of time. And we need to look at the economic factors. And
People from government, economic factors. Some people just love to see football, but of course, South Africa, we can't just continue playing by qualification. I think we have a very good team now that is poised at the top of the group, and Shakes Mashaba and his boys should get us to qualify wherever this tournament is going to be played. We'll continue our discussion on the Ebola virus disease after the break. Welcome back. Ngwaneso, start up pele ka hlolo sa letsatsi mona Bonitas House Call ho SABC 2. Lenaneo le utlwisetsang ngaka ka tlung. And kajeno re bua ka Ebola. Now, you have 4,000 going on 4,500 people who have died, mostly from West Africa, from the Ebola virus. And some of them are healthcare workers. And you have one in the United States getting the contact, and the whole world goes into a sneeze. Do you think this is maybe a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding of this condition? Or the Americans just scared that just that one case might get the whole of America affected by Ebola virus?
Yeah. So I think healthcare workers are a good example of someone that has got direct contact with someone. When we talk of direct contact with secretions, that's exactly what we're talking about. Healthcare workers touch these bodies. So in fact, up to 400 people that have died, of the 4,500 that have died, over 400 are actually healthcare workers. So
but how does it happen? I mean, they put those PPE or protective, personal protective equipment. They look like Neil Armstrong as an astronaut. And how do they get affected?
Well, they're able to do that if there's a high suspicion that the person has got Ebola, but because of the non-specific manner in which Ebola usually presents.
Sometimes they touch patients when the diagnosis have not been made just yet.
So when patients present, they don't. In fact, it's uncommon for them to present with a bleeding.
No, they don't say I've got Ebola.
Exactly,
Yeah,
and it's uncommon to present with bleeding. It's usually with the GIT symptoms, with the diarrhea and the vomiting and the fever, which are non-specific symptoms. So you don't have the threshold of suspicion to say this might be a case of Ebola. So you're not using what we call a PPE, the personal protective equipment, to actually sort of avoid yourself from becoming infected. They don't use that at an early stage. They're trying to use it, but even that PPE, under those circumstances, is really difficult to use. The reason for that is hot and humid in those countries. When you put on those PPE, as you saw on that insert, it actually causes a person to sweat, right? And if you're not careful in how you remove the thing, you can again infect yourself. So as Dr. Benson has mentioned, one of the ways you can actually infect yourself, you remove your hood, and as an example, you've got your gloves on and you wipe your forehead or wipe your eyes, right? You're going to infect yourself. So there are problems even with PPE. It reduces the risk, but it's not foolproof. in terms of ensuring you don't become infected. What happened in the United States, they didn't have adequate PPE. Right? They didn't have adequate PPE.
Of all people, the Americans?
In the United States.
Mzigaba ebuhlungu masikizi kana bokumelento ehlela abantu balamazwe aseAfrika. Yaye kuyakhuthaza nokho ukubona urhulumente osomashishini nabogqirha balapha eMzantsi Afrika bephuma ngobuninzi ukuyonceda nokuyonqanda amanzi engena endlini kwezi ndawo. Sithi uThixo abomeleze abapha amandla bangatshafi kulo msebenzi onzima abaphezu kwawo eli dabi abaphezu kwalo. We'll round up our discussion on the Ebola virus disease when we return. You're watching Bonitas House Call here on SABC2 and welcome back. Now, in the recent epidemic, as opposed to America and maybe other countries that would have thought would have done well in this condition, it is Senegal who have shown exactly how to contain this condition, having one important case and ensuring that the infection does not go beyond that one case. What do you attribute this to?
Well, what Senegal employed well. First, the measures you've got is to identify early. They've done that. They've identified the case early. And then the measure that you've got is to isolate the case. They've done that effectively. They've then identified all the contacts of these cases, follow them up for a period of 21 days. In that period, there were 2 that they tested further, but those 2 came back negative. And then in that process, what they did is they broke the chain of transmission. And these are the measures that they employed effectively. So this is measures that we employed in 96 with a case that we had of Ebola.
Breaking the chain of the transmission.
That's correct.
The Americans say you need $1 billion to get rid of Ebola. You say it's not about money, it's about capacity.
It's not about money, it's about capacity. That $1 billion will support the capacity. But unless you've got the boots on the ground to actually implement exactly the measures which Dr. Benson has actually referred to, unless you've got those boots on the ground to actually implement those control measures, irrespective of how much money you pump into the problem is not going to go
So
away.
you need more foot soldiers so that you can diagnose, so that you can follow up the cases, and we can break the transmission of the virus. Professor Madi, thank you very much for informing us this morning, being responsive to this because it's a topical matter, and we're very happy that on Bonitas House Call, we're able to make our contribution in educating the nation around Ebola. Dr. Fru Benson, thank the Minister, thank you, the Director General, Precious Mansuso, for making you available to this show, and we remain eternally indebted to you guys for having educated us this morning. Banabeso, Olona bohle barati ba tshehetsi ba thaselle ba khothumetse ka sitana le ba manukeng ba lana odeng. Re tanki hangwe, tanki habedi, tanki hararo. Ela har diela di khala ibile re meno la tlhabela. We'll be back next Saturday with colostomies. So don't miss it here on SABC2 at 8:30 in the morning. Ar kopaneng hape bekeng e tlang. Thato Haile Morena. Thanks for joining us today. From me, Dr. Victor Ramathesele, ke Morama Kuapane, ke Namane Tshehla, ke Mtangwa Mletsane. You take care.